At ICA San Diego, we use art as a vehicle to question the world around us and bring our community together. Before the end of the year, we have a family day in Balboa Park and 2 opening exhibitions here at ICA North, as well as a pre-holiday shopping fundraiser event. And I hope that all of you will join us for those events. We are incredibly proud to have Carolina Caycedo here with us tonight. She is the inaugural regional artist for our new season, Limitless World, Limited Growth. Caycedo is a celebrated multimedia artist, born to Colombian parents, and lives in Los Angeles. Her practice focuses on the future of shared resources, environmental justice, and cultural biodiversity. She received an MFA from USC and a BFA from the Los Andes University in Bogota. Caycedo is very well accomplished, with recent solo exhibitions at MCA Chicago, ICA Boston, the Hammer Museum, the Whitney Museum, and LACMA. Yay! It is a real honor and privilege to have her exhibition here in San Diego and to have her here tonight to share with us firsthand about her work. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Carolina Caycedo.
Thank you. Oh, this one?
Is that easier
Oh,
for you?
okay, cool, yeah. Buenas noches. Muchas gracias. Thank you to all the folks here at ICA for taking care of my work for the last few months and for putting everything together so that we're comfortable tonight. And yeah. Uh-oh. I let it sleep. Oh, okay. So today I'm going to focus on kind of finding the lineage of the work you see here. It's a series called Distressed Depth that I did in 2021 during the pandemic. While I was pregnant, I started the research or kind of the production of this piece, and then yeah, it was shown for the first time and commissioned by ICA Richmond in Virginia for an exhibition that was called Commonwealths. And a few artists were invited to develop work thinking about kind of the political structure of the Commonwealth and focusing on the Commonwealths of Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Puerto Rico. But of course, if you think about Puerto Rico in comparison to Virginia and Pennsylvania, maybe the better word to describe Puerto Rico would be common debt more than Commonwealth. Because of the colonial status, it is really not a state as Virginia and Pennsylvania is. It's a free associated state. And for the last few years, a government structure called La Junta de Control Fiscal, or the fiscal, how would you translate that? La Junta, a board, a fiscal board is, and a fiscal board actually put together by the federal government is kind of the most powerful decision taker in Puerto Rico so far. And so we see that they're probably not doing their job very well when we see that there's still Puerto Ricans that don't have electricity today, almost a month after the last hurricane passed on the island. And I just came back from Puerto Rico actually a week ago, so I could see that with my own eyes. So what I want to do in this talk today is kind of find the lineage of works that kind of bring us to distressed debt. So some of you may know other of my work that's more dedicated to water issues, looking at the affectations of extractivist economies and policies and infrastructure across the Americas. And some of that will be kind of represented in this lineage. But let me start showing you these series that I call the flag series. And Gaela, actually, when she introduced me, say that I was born to Colombian parents. I was born in London, actually. First generation migrant in London, but actually I always say third generation immigrant because it was the sisters of my grandmother who started traveling outside of Colombia back in the 50s. And then a generation above me, my parents, and then me, and now my kids. I have a Colombian Puerto Rican daughter, and I gave birth to a first generation Angelino 2 years ago, actually. So yeah, so these series of flags, as a transnational subject that I identify myself as a transnational subject, both British, both Colombian. I have a U.S. passport too, right? Like passports are like keys that open doors in a way. That's how I think about them. Not necessarily in terms of like feeling a nationalist pride about these identities, but feeling other kind of pride about these identities, and understanding how my mere existence kind of also expands what it means to be British, what it means to be American, what it means to be Colombian, no? And so out of these reflections came this series that I call the Flag Series, that actually combine flags that live inside me in a way. So the one above is the first one we did. That was probably 2003 in London. I have a couple of friends that had a project called 24/7, and it was a gallery that worked 24/7 on the facade of one of their homes. And this was the project I proposed to them, was to sew this kind of combined flag, British Colombian flag, and to hang it there in the middle of London for a whole month. And so that's the flag you see above. And the flag you see below is the combination of the Puerto Rican flag and the Colombian flag, which would be the flag of my daughter, Una. But then a number of them continued to happen, also thinking about, after the first time I came to LA and started thinking, where does actually the Mexican border finish here in California? I don't think it's here in in Tijuana, near in San Diego, maybe not even in LA, not even in San Francisco. I'm not sure where the border is really. And so there comes that Mexica Americana flag, which is the one you see in the top corner. And the stars that are in that Mexica Americana flag are the stars that represent the the complete states and the partial states that Mexico lost to the U.S. during the Mexican-American War. I started thinking also about people who inhabit different nationalities that are at war. So combining the Israeli and the Palestinian flag, the Iraqi and the United States flag, Lebanon and Israel flag, the Irish and the UK flag. So not necessarily at war, but that had been in conflict or at war at the moment that I was doing the flags. And thinking also what happens, in a very kind of romantic way, thinking about what happens when, and these are real stories, when two people from these countries in conflict meet, fall in love, have kids, and their kids are actually, kind of the brew out of this war. And then the flag at the bottom is actually a flag I did after Obama was elected president. Remember that one of his campaign mottos was change? You remember? And so the question after he came and was in power for a little bit was like, what change? I wasn't sure what change. And then the two flags on the top, those have a particular story here on this side, are the Cyprus and Greek flag and the Albanian and Greek flag. And those were done for an invitation to exhibit actually in the city of Athens in a port of entry. So the city of Athens have, of course, airports as ports of entries, but also as being a Mediterranean city, it has also sea ports of entry. And so this was in a sea port of entry. And they were actually censored by the military post that was at that port of entry. They didn't like at all that they were being compared to the Albanian people. So the flags, what I've realized, what they do is they do kind of flare up or have the ability to flare up any racism in folks, and also flare up these expansions of identity that some of us embody with our mere existence too. And then out of, kind of, and bear with me, these are early pieces in my career, so also think about this, as pieces kind of 10, 15 years ago. So also a young artist developing language, playing with symbols, no? I lived in Puerto Rico for 7 years. As I told you, Puerto Rico, that's really where I learned about colonialism, and I could feel colonialism firsthand and live colonialism firsthand. It's incredible, and just as a side note, I was there for 10 days, as I told you last week, and after Hurricane, I hadn't been there since Hurricane Maria. So the last time I had been was before Hurricane Maria happened, so 5 years ago. And the island is battered, it's received a number of blows, the infrastructure is failing, the economy is in ruins. But it was so beautiful to see the strength of mutual aid in the island, and see also how even within that colonial context, and even within the context of climate injustice, because they are, if you think about frontline climate injustice, Puerto Rico and the Caribbean Antilles are in the front line, physically in the front line of climate injustice, and they've been in the front line of everything, colonialism in America. Where did the first Spaniards and Europeans landed? In the Caribbean islands. So they've been in the front line of everything, they've been holding that front line for us forever. And, with climate warming, what happens is that the sea gets warmer, and so the winds get faster, and that's why we see in more and more hurricanes, right? And so they are in the front line of that climate injustice, receiving the blow of more and more hurricanes. And so even within that context of colonial and climate injustice, it was really beautiful to see what I'm calling little islands of sovereignty, dotted throughout the island of Puerto Rico. And that sovereignty would take shape in kind of 3 principal ways, like food sovereignty, so people growing their own food and distributing their own food. Energy sovereignty, so off-the-grid, solar, wind technologies, and also bioenergy technology, so biodigesters and stuff like that. And then water sovereignty too, a lot of water harvesting, water collection, also the defense of channeling of rivers. Now the Army Corps of Engineers have 13 projects to channel rivers in Puerto Rico, which would be just an environmental disaster. So it was really beautiful to witness those islands of sovereignty. And it's not that I didn't witness them before when I lived there 7 years, but it was a nice reminder. And things just have been getting more cruent, if that's a word in English, cruel y cruento. So, and a little bit, all this story is just to talk about that little patch that's called Live Local Love. And it's kind of taking that Puerto Rican flag, which is the single star, and that light blue triangle. And by the way, for those who are familiar with the Puerto Rican flag, you may see it, the blue, you may see it with 2 different colors, like a darker color, more closer to the actually United States flag, which is kind of the flag used by people who want Puerto Rico to become a state. And then you see other flags that have a lighter flag, a lighter color, like this one, which would be kind of the Caribbean blue. And that's the flag used by people who want independence in Puerto Rico. So next time you see a Puerto Rican flag, check out the blue to see what is it representing. But yeah, that living in Puerto Rico for 7 years and keeping to have a family and a close knit of friends there really makes me think about how local love and local care is perhaps one of the clearest way that I see to walk out of this kind of climate debacle that we are in right now. And then after doing that small patch came the idea of actually migrating those words into what I call the banner series, which are the ones that follow. And the banner series are really fun because they can exist in in an exhibition setting like this, but they can also exist outside, hang from facades, or actually be carried by folks in marches and protests or performance contexts. And these banner series are kind of calls to actions or statements also. Sometimes there are quotes too. And so here's a number of them. The first one actually speaks about what I've been talking about, you know, immigrants influence home cultures. We all know that. Don't pay taxes. And that was a moment. That banner was done thinking about, you know, the war on drugs and the war on terror, and how under these wars and these kind of policies of war against terror, war against drugs, a lot of our taxes end up funding the military, right? Think that the U.S. Army is the most pollutant industry in the world. No other corporation produces more pollution or emits greenhouse gases than the U.S. military. And so think that our taxes are funding the military. So do we want them to fund the military? Do we want them to fund education? Do we want them to fund the arts? It's like a statement to make you think about those stuff. Crisis is a means to govern is actually a quote by Tikkun, which is a French collective. There's another banner in Portuguese that reads, Mujeres rebeldes y felices, women rebellious and happy. Ni Dios, ni patrón, ni marido, which is a kind of anarchist feminist statement. Neither God, neither God, neither boss, neither husband. And then the last one you see is trust each other, and actually takes the colors of the dollar bill and the font of the dollar, and kind of makes a twist, on the kind of U.S. motto, fiscal motto by excellence, in God we trust, and actually is calling for a mutual aid approach, trust each other. And so another kind of national symbol that I've been attracted to are note bills. Also thinking about note bills as paper, right? Really as a surface to draw upon too. The material of note bills being this particular kind of paper, and thinking about them as surface where you can actually draw upon. And these are some of the first intervened note bills that I did that are time bank notes. eFlux, that's a collective of artists and curators. They do the eFlux journal. You may be familiar, and you may receive tons of eFlux emails probably if you're in the arts. But they put together shows, and at some point they had a time bank project, and they reached out to me if I would design some of the time bank notes. And for those who are not familiar what a time bank is, or what a time bank note is their currency that are based on hours that you put into a service or a labor. And so any service or labor is paid the same. So if you're an hour driving a taxi, you're paid with a 1 hour time bank note. Or if you're a surgeon doing a brain surgery, and you spend 2 hours doing that, you're paid the same, 2 time bank notes. So it's a way kind of to leverage labor too, to also understand that everyone, and no matter what the kind of labor is they do, kind of supports and constructs society. But anyway, so these were kind of my takes on design. So also, again, takes on note bills of my countries of origin. So the British, like the late Queen, becomes una madre de la Plaza de Mayo, which is an Argentinian collective, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, who were the grandmothers who actually started finding their grandchildren who had been kidnapped and put into other families by the Argentinian regime, dictatorship. a Colombian banknote intervened, and yeah, and the $1 bill intervened too. And then the use of those bills took me to this other piece. That's a piece from, I think, 2012. Yeah, it's called Dependency, and it's a series of stamped note bills and then a series of stamps. And I actually saw that here in the education you were doing some stamp note bills, right? Yeah. So the stamps actually are the prices of a gram of cocaine, a liter of gas, and a minimum wage of the cities that I've lived in or that I've worked in, stamped over note bills of the countries where those cities, but kind of crisscrossing the information, right? So over a 200 Mexican peso note bill, you have the information of London at the moment. In 2012, a gram of Coke would be, geez, I'm blind, $113. A liter of gas would be $2. And then a minimum wage would be, in 2012, a little bit over $1,700. While in LA, a gram of Coke would be $75. A liter of gas would be $125, and a minimum wage would be almost $1,300. But then if you see in Mexico, a gram of Coke would be just $22. A liter of gas would be under $1, and then a minimum wage would be just $140. And so on, no? And so thinking about also our dependencies as society, of course, thinking about, again, this war on terror, that's why the detail of the cost of a cocaine gram is in there. Thinking about where raw materials come from and where do processed materials are consumed the most, right? If you think about a global south and global north dependency, and what are the costs of that dependency on each side. So, so yeah, those, and I probably need to do an updated version now, because I think prices are a bit crazy today in terms of gas and Coke and whatnot, and the minimum wage. But just to give you a ground of where does this come from also, you may be familiar with the work of Cildo Meireles. He is a Brazilian conceptual artist that has been really influential in my work. And then he has a beautiful series of works that is called Insertions into Ideological Circuits. It started way back in the 70s, maybe even late 60s. And they basically take the shape the same as a stamp that is stamped over a note bill, and this note bill starts to circulate again into the Brazilian economy, or the economy wherever the stamp is done. But mainly, he responds to his country, to the Brazilian context. He is from Rio de Janeiro, and he's always lived and operated from Rio de Janeiro. And so here are some examples of some of those stamps, of early stamps. I really like, because they are really questioning also. So this one, ¿Quién mató Herzog?, is like, who assassinated Herzog? Herzog was a journalist that was killed. And then all the way coming up to the, 2000, like 3 or 4 years ago, this one has the stamp with the face of Marielle Franco. Marielle Franco was a black woman, a queer woman, lesbian woman actually, from Rio de Janeiro, who come from the favelas, so from the very vulnerable and impoverished communities, and came into the city council and was doing great job there, and she was killed while she was in the city council. So, you see Cildo inserting, this question into ideological circuits in, all the way back in the 70s, and then being, I think Cildo is over his 80s, and then really coming up to date and, questioning again, ¿Quién mató a Marielle? no? And then this is another very famous piece of the series, which is actually stamps that he would put over the Coca-Cola bottles that you could only read when the bottle was filled. And so, yeah, I just wanted to pinpoint these because, you know, national symbols such as flags, the symbols you find on note bills, the symbols you find in hymns, right? So those are more like textual symbologies through actually literature, are ideological, right? And are respondent to an ideological construction of a nation, of who is in power, of who is designing, of who is represented in these note bills, right? And so, as an artist, I am interested in questioning and challenging those symbols, right? And more when we find ourselves in nations that claim to be land of the free, but also are oppressing a number of its citizens or people who are aspiring to come as immigrants to the country. And so I continue to, and this is a more recent piece in 2017, kind of a bit more tied into my more recent work around environmental issues. And this one is called, oh, they're so small. Wait, what's going on here? We can't really see it. You know, it's impossible. But anyways, this piece is a series of interventions, very quick interventions, writings over note bills of different countries, talking about concepts that have arisen and been developed by environmental activists and environmentalists across the world. So the concept, for example, of climate debt, you may be familiar with, and if not, climate debt is that debt that countries have because of their pollution, because of their mining in territories that are not theirs through corporate capitalist investment, for example. So, for example, in the Canadian note bill, the message was like, Canada, pay your climate debt now. Thinking about, for example, specifically the number of mining operations that Canada has in Colombia. But they're too small to kind of read anyways. And then these banners are actually the most recent iteration of the banner series. And again, kind of responding to current events that have, you know, and then things that have informed and I'm interested in my work at the moment. So the first one reads, our power to nurture. I had just given birth to, so feeling again that power, that feminist power and that feminist kind of commitment to put life at the center, right? So our power to nurture, that's our power as women. And men have that power too, of course, no? I'm not saying that to be a feminist, you just, you know, you need to be a woman. Anyone can be a feminist and put life at the center. Like oceans we rise, of course, it's talking about the rising of oceans and how, you know, this new movement of young people who are engaged in environmental issues. And actually that's taken, it's a quote actually from the Fridays for Climate that was initiated by Greta Thunberg. So the students that come out to protest on Fridays. We are our mountains is a motto of an Armenian environmental front. And the last one is actually the motto of what we call the Green Wave, which is the fight for abortion rights across the Americas that originates in Latin America and is now so current and pertinent here in the United States. And what it reads in English is say, maternity will be desired or will not be. So going back to, and I'm gonna read, and what is my time? Let me see, just to make sure that we have time for, so this is kind of gives you a little bit of background of how the work here at ICA comes to be. My interest in kind of challenging these kind of ideological symbols that you find in note bills, in mottos, in flags, whatnot. And then my interest in access to water started, through that interest, I started looking at how does the privatization of water look like on paper through the issuing of debt bonds, of stakeholding, certificates and whatnot. And also how does water infrastructure look in things like note bills and whatnot. So I started collecting note bills that have water dams or water reservoirs, started collecting debt bonds from Puerto Rico specifically. But let me just talk and read a little bit about that while I show you a few of those bonds. So public utility and site development bonds, including water, energy, electrical, sewage, and infrastructure bonds, have been traded since the late 1800s as part of the bond market, a financial market also known as debt market or credit market, where participants can issue new debt or buy and sell debt securities. This is usually in the form of bonds, but it may include note bills and so on. I'm a bit bummed because the images are coming together instead of one at a time, so we see them small, but okay, I'll continue. Water and other utility bonds are resources from diverse capital markets for the execution of water-related and infrastructural projects. They have the same principle than other bonds, where an issuer raises a fixed amount of capital, repaying the capital and accrued interest over time. While it appears as a funding mechanism that governments, municipalities, and agencies assume to develop water or energy infrastructure projects that mostly benefit extractive industries, it does contribute to the privatization of public utilities by commercializing what I consider a human right. And so to put water on a debt market is transferring what is a human right that we should all have access to, and it makes it a commodity. With global demand for common goods such as water expected to explode in the coming years, fund managers are recommended investing in bonds as a long-term bet on an essential commodity whose supplies are limited. Under the present worldwide uncertain circumstances brought by COVID, we see a surge of governmental reach in all aspects of society. In more right-wing governments, heavier surveillance and the distribution of public funds in favor of corporations and first-class citizens have been experienced. In leftist-oriented governments, a universal basic income and the nationalization of private hospitals and healthcare providers are being implemented. Either way, this reinforcement of governmental power doesn't necessarily mean a reinforcement of what is public, nor of the commons. As quarantined citizens, we seem to have less participation in decision-making, mutual aid networks, and local communal processes, waiting instead for the administration government to take action. And remember, this is a piece from 2021, so this is kind of the train of thought behind this piece. In the same fashion as the 2008 recession, after the sanitary and economic crisis peaks, we can expect a colossal creation of unlimited financial credit with low interests, a huge amount of debt that grows faster than the GDP. Most probably, bond debts will be issued as part of these credit lines. Bonds are expanding their influence in a financial structure where governmental agencies and municipalities assume a ridiculously high interest debt. The issuer will need to generate cash flow to repay interest and capital. Water bonds have massive failures all around the world. The municipalities and governmental agencies pay high interest, affecting their finances critically, and their infrastructure is not executed. In the case of Puerto Rico, for example, it emphasizes a colonial status, resulting in PR having more than 15 times the median bond debt that the other 50 states in the United States, arriving to a situation known as distressed debt. When an entity is in financial distress, the original holders of the issued securities sell them to new buyers at a significantly discounted price. Hedge funds, also referred to as vulture funds or bottom feeder funds, specialize in acquiring these bond debts, pushing governments to improve tax collection and reduce public spending in order to keep up with interest payments. Just as a side note, after Hurricane Maria, when the junta was established in Puerto Rico and when the debt just went out of control, 280 schools were closed across the island. in order to pay the debt. So to reduce expense and to pay the debt, 280 schools were closed on the island. And it's incredible because at least 20% of those schools have been reclaimed by the community and are mutual aid centers today. So the language and concepts, So the language and concepts used in bonds are very particular to financing, but could be related to other processes, such as face value, maturity date, accuracy of certain representations, redemption, subordinate, continuing compliance. Furthermore, utility bonds include language related to infrastructure, particular projects, and sometimes the overall history of the public utility system itself. So most bonds today are issued electronically. Historical bonds, notes, and bills took shape as physical certificates with a particular official aesthetic. So these are kind of some of the examples you see in here. City shields, insignias, ornate borders, imprints, signatures, and vignettes that range from animals to architecture to personalities. And ironically, all paper historical Puerto Rican bond certificates are in demand today as collectibles due to the financial current crisis. But I wanted to share, let's see if we can see some of these. Yeah, they're very small. But the word bond as we know it today actually comes from a much more obscure and darker history of the United States. And so the first bonds that were actually originated and executed in the United States are from the Deep South. And they come all the way from the late 1700s. And the first actually commodity that was bonded was the black body, the enslaved body. So the word bond actually comes from bondage, because it was bondaged commodities, the enslaved body, were the first commodities that were, mortgaged, if you wish, in order to gain cash flow. And here are some of those original late 1700 bond certificates that I was able to research. And here you can see others. So, this one is one of the earliest that I could research, is a one from Virginia. It's crazy because, it was not a one-off thing. It happened pretty regularly that an owner of slaves would mortgage their enslaved person to a railroad company, to another crop grower, or to another plantation owner, in order to, to obtain cash flow, and when they needed cash flow. And if you see these very early bonds, this is like from the 1851, they already had those ornate kind of insignias, the seals, the signature, and they were already kind of, this was a talonario, you call it? Or like a checkbook. So they were already printed, and it was just a matter of fact to fill in the date, the signature, and the name of the enslaved person. So this one reads, for example, it's a bond for $625. It says November 27, 1851. I'm talking about the little one, small check shape. It says, received of so and so and so, received 625 for being in full for the purchase of my Negro slave named Mary. The side and title of said slave, I warrant and defend against the claims of all persons whatsoever, and likewise warrant sound and healthy, as witness my hand and seal. Oh, this one you could probably read better. So this is another bond for $220 for the hire of Negro, Mr. Jackson, seems. For the year 1853, the Virginia Central Railroad Company promises to pay so-and-so, or assign the sum of $220 on the first day of January 1854. Said Negro is to be employed on the Virginia Central Railroad and to be returned well clothed in the usual way and with a hat and a blanket. So these are actually the first bonds that were issued in North America. And that's where the bond word comes from actually slavery and bondage. And even when slavery was not legal anymore in Europe, you still had these bonds selling in European markets. So we have people, you know, benefiting and creating debt and credit out of bonds like this, not only in the US market, but in markets such as London, Paris, the Netherlands at that time. And these are other examples of those early slave bonds. So you see, they did, you know, these kind of aesthetic of these slave bonds, these seals continue into the kind of more contemporary bonds up into the 50s and 60s as we recognize them. And these are some of the bonds that I actually use in the collages and works of distressed debt. So distressed debt is a series of digital collages printed on cotton and silk, and also printed on paper, that evidence the symbolic quality and power structure of the imagery and the language construct of bond certificates. Visuals, words, and phrases are extrapolated from the original documents and are used to create a palimpsest that provides a layer account of how debt has been historically created and how water and other common goods are privatized using financial schemes. So here you can see some of the works that you probably recognize from inside. A smaller series of paper collages are produced, so none of them are actually here, but they're part of the series too, using the original certificates from where the visuals or language are extracted from. So yeah, these are kind of more digital collages, like the process is scanning the bond and then playing with all that imagery. But then after that scanning process, I actually got the physical bonds and cut them up and created these series of actually physical collages. And they take names out of that language that I was mentioning before. So this one is called Sinking Fund. This one is called After Hour Trading. And of course, this one is a reference to the vulture fund and the bottom feeder fund that is a really big problem in places like Puerto Rico or even Colombia, or places with a huge amount of debt. Yeah, these are. Oh, I think I'm going to leave it here with the vulture fund. And open it up to questions, comments, suggestions. Yeah.
Hello, questions? Anyone? Can I have a question? Come on.
Thank you, Carolina, for that talk. Very insightful and powerful. I had a question about the process. You mentioned working with the actual bonds for some of these collages, and you mentioned also that these are collectibles. How did you, I guess, track down like the actual physical copy of some of these bonds? And yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, they are. So there are specialized houses in kind of note bill, bond, stock holding, or stocks collections. So there's a few kind of, here in the United States, like 3 or 4 like antiquarians that are just dedicated to that. So they have a huge catalog, and you can go through the catalog and ask. And some of them are just like impossible to buy. They're like a very old one where there's no many copies can cost, I don't know, thousands of dollars. But the ones I got hold would range from $30 to $150, right? Something like that. Like one of the most expensive ones I bought was the Cédula Hipotecaria de Puerto Rico. This one, the pink one, which is a bond from like the 20s. So still during Spanish regime. So a bond coming out of Spanish colonial government in Puerto Rico before the United States became the colonial government there. That was probably like $300 or something. So yeah, there are kind of people dedicated to that. You can find them on eBay. Sometimes I would buy directly on eBay too. And then a lot of them would also be just doing research in actually local archives in Pennsylvania, Virginia, or Puerto Rico. And then they would, kind of talking with the archivist or librarian, they would scan the piece for me, and then I wouldn't have an actual physical copy to work with. It would just be the scan. Yeah.
Someone else?
Thank you so much. I was wondering, so far you are covering nations that you are personally connected to. Are you planning on extending those nations?
No, not at the moment. But it would be interesting to think, for example, what kind of debt is coming out from the Ukrainian-Russian conflict today, for example. That would be interesting to see. What kind of bonds are being issued by the Ukrainian government, if at all. Maybe that would be a good place to look at, for sure, and see what kind of goods are being privatized that way, or sometimes looking at what are the kind of bonds that a country or city, because cities and states issue bonds too, actually, allows you to identify also some of the kind of more obscure problems or the origins of conflict, for example. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, for example, lithium bonds coming out of Ukraine, out of this conflict, because there's Lithuania. I was going to say Ukraine has some of the bigger lithium deposits in the world, together with Argentina and Chile, and here in the United States too, actually in Nevada. But lithium is not part of the rhetoric of the conflict in Ukraine and Russia today, but it is a source of the conflict because it is one of the minerals that's going to be more used towards the future and towards transitional energy technology, because we need a lot of lithium for batteries and for storing energy so far. So yeah, I would be curious. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah.
Sorry, I have another one. Since we're talking, would you say that your focus is now actually on bonds rather than on maybe national
Symbols?
struggles?
No, I think that you can't separate them. I don't think that like if you think about the number of bonds that are issued, for example, by a place like Puerto Rico today, and you see the kind of the struggles that the Puerto Ricans are kind of, having in terms of access to water, access to education. Again, what I said, like bonds, and looking at when and how many bonds were issued by a place in a certain year, in a certain decade, can certainly give you a historic perspective of some of the, issues and struggles going on in that country at that moment. So and I'm actually, like today, right now, I'm not focusing on either bonds or struggles. Or let's say, maybe I am looking at kind of energetic struggles and struggles for water and energy sovereignty. Not so much through the bonds perspective right now, but more from a perspective of what are the communities doing to resist this privatization. So I guess I arrived to the bonds and to looking at bonds because it's part of a wider scheme of privatizing common goods, such as water.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Caro. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really wonderful. And I think something that I keep thinking about in the repetition of the word bonds as I'm listening to you, but also just in knowing your work more broadly and in its commitment to solidarity with communities on the ground that are enacting politics of solidarity, not just with people and other humans, but also with non-human living things in the environment and non-human living beings. It, I think, is also this context of the social bond and like bond not coming from this context of enslavement and the kind of primary, like these, racialized capitalist foundations for this nation, but these other forms of relationality. So I wonder if you could just speak about, like, I know that that's maybe less articulated in this talk, so I would love to hear about that other way that like bonds show up in your practice, because I think you do that like so well and so poetically.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about original contracts lately, and kind of original contracts we have with nature and it's kind of natural law in a way. And how, like, really the first law is that natural law and how the way energy flows in an ecosystem and how, there needs to be like natural contracts and original contracts. And I came to this term through a recent work I did in Idaho where there's a number of community members and indigenous tribes, indigenous tribes that are pushing for the undamming of the Snake River, which is a tributary to the Columbia River. And so the Snake River is a really incredible place because it's a river where salmon come up, via the Columbia and come up. It's the longest migration of salmon in the world and the highest, basically. It comes up to the Sawtooth Mountains, which is you may know because it's a very cheap winter resort. The thing is that if the dams don't go down by 2025, all the wild salmon will disappear in that river, or at least the Chinook and the sockeye salmon. So it's probably going to, we're really witnessing the extinction of the wild salmon in that river. And out of doing field work there and bonding with some of the local tribes, there was a really beautiful story of origin that talks about reciprocal sacrifice. And it's before humans came, and there was just animals in the world, and it was the time for humans to come. There was a great council of animals, and they were really worried that we were coming to Earth and we really didn't have any means to survive. We didn't have scales, we didn't have hair, we didn't have claws or big teeth or anything. And they were really like worried for us because we were not going to survive. And so Solomon said, I'm going to sacrifice and come back every spring to feed humans, and so they can store me, and I will carry them, and feed them throughout the winter because I'll come in copious amounts, and then water promised then to be Solomon's home, right? And when humans came and Solomon came in the first sacrifice run, the first spring run, they said to human, we will continue to come if you promise to take care of us. Now we're going to lose our voice. Now you're going to be able to talk for us. And so it's really beautiful that the tribes are coming back to this, tale of origin to put in the forefront this original contract that we've been breaching as humans with other parts of, other entities in the ecosystem, with water, with other animals, even with minerals, right? There's like a lot of tribes say that minerals and fossil fuels are actually dead stuff. And it is, it's actually fossilized dead stuff. And that is dead stuff needs to be underground because when it comes out of the ground, it becomes sickness. And yeah, we are seeing the sickness around us. We see in climate collapse, extinctions of species and stuff, no? So yeah, I don't know if I'm responding to the question, but it made me think about this natural contracts and original contracts that we have forgotten. And how important the arts can be to make us remember, music, film, visual arts, literature, poetry, to remember these original contracts that we have and to honor them, right? Like if we start honoring these contracts, perhaps we have a chance to, to be actually in bond again with these entities that we were in relation to because of these contracts. When you breach the contract, you stop being in relation, no? And you stop and you start being in a position of power.
Someone else?
I think you mentioned that you did much of this work under commission in Virginia, is that correct?
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that it's entirely likely that Virginians come to the question of debt bonds with a very different perspective than Puerto Ricans do. Maybe more like a historical curiosity than something like Puerto Ricans are currently suffering from these bonds that they didn't even have any say in
Correct.
incurring. So I'm wondering if your work, or the people that you worked with in Virginia, you know, did they have their eyes opened by some of the work that you did, or what were any perspectives changed by this?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I was not the only person talking from a Puerto Rican perspective in that exhibition. So there was actually a couple of Puerto Rican artists that, you know, through the work, we would challenge actually that curatorial narrative of the Commonwealth as being something that would connect Puerto Rico, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, because we were like, there's no way that you compare us on that level, because, you know, the state of Puerto Rico, I mean, the status of Puerto Rico, even though it says it's a Commonwealth legally, it has nothing to do with the advantages that actually bonds have brought to citizens in Virginia or in Pennsylvania, no? And then I think also one thing that a lot of us kind of were surprised and and learned about through this research particularly was the origin of the actual bond figure in the financial world, coming out from actually, you know, the slave history and the mortgaging of human bodies through the slave trade and slave industry. So I think that was also, it was really interesting. The show was really interesting. It's called Commonwealth, and you can look it up. But it was, you know, it happened during pandemic. While the show was opening or about to open, remember, I'm not sure who was, remember a lot of statues were being toppled all over the world. And in Virginia, a very famous one, it's a mounted man on a horse. I can't remember who was the person, was also removed, or at least the pressure of the people made the city take the decision to remove the statue. So, yeah, I guess there was many things happening in terms of like eye-opening and challenging narratives, not only in the show, but in Richmond at that time. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Richmond, I'm saying Virginia, but Richmond specifically. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming in. Enjoy the music and the drinks. Thank you.